Where to start with Elon Musk, the awkward but brilliant visionary? Time magazine describes Musk as both clown and genius, the man who aspires to save our planet and get us a new one to inhabit. The richest man in the world, Musk has also courted controversy.
An experiment in both governance and billionaire power grabs is ending. And it's kind of different than what we might have thought when it began.
He was greatly disliked by the American public. He became political kryptonite.
I am not the evil, I just misunderstood.
Billions of dollars amassed by selling Teslas to promote European far-right parties.
I'm not just MAGA, I'm dog gothic MAGA.
Elon's cuts are officially killing people.
Straight up Sig Heil.
This is the chainsaw for bureaucracy. Oh. I just want to be clear. I am not a Nazi.
I think we covered it.
But that's exactly what a Nazi would say. Damn it.
So the other day, YouTube recommended to me an ancient relic of the past that just about gave me whiplash. A 2019 episode of PewDiePie's Meme Review, featuring none other than Justin Roiland and Elon Musk. Now, there's never really been a time in my life where I've watched a ton of PewDiePie content, but I do remember when this video came out, just because it was such a huge deal for a YouTuber to be collabing with the creator of Rick and Morty and the CEO of Tesla at the same time. It was bizarre back then, and it's somehow even more bizarre now in retrospect, considering just how much both of these men have destroyed their own reputations beyond repair in just under half a decade. So, of course, I had to give it a watch.
Elon Musk! I mean, there's some good memes here.
Is this the first one?
I believe so. He's earnestly presenting this in Congress.
And you can see how easy it would be to just replace that text and add anything you want there.
It's almost as though he wasn't saying that.
The first thing I noticed right off the bat is just how jarringly coherent Elon Musk sounded back then. I mean, maybe I'm looking into it too much, but the way he quietly and carefully articulates his words here is like a breath of fresh air compared to whatever this is.
I mean, we're trying to get good things done, but also, have a good time doing it. And,
yeah, most people don't realize that the origin of the word meme is the, I believe, 1976 book by Richard Dawkins, The Selfish Gene.
The left wanted to make comedy illegal, you know? Yeah. Like, you can't make fun of anything. So there's like, comedy sucks. It's like, nothing's funny. You can't make fun of anything. It's like, legalize comedy. Yeah.
That idea is propagated like genes, based on sort of like a survival of the fittest paradigm. Only the strongest memes survive.
Yeah, I'm assuming this was before the ketamine era. As you might expect, the 6-year-old comments down below reflect a bygone era in which Elon Musk was once widely beloved by both sides of the political spectrum. It's crazy to think how not that long ago, American liberals were openly lauding Elon, not just for his seemingly eco-friendly companies and his commitment to putting humans on Mars by 2022, but for an unusually endearing demeanor for someone worth, at that point, a cool $100 billion. If nothing else, deciding to participate in a video like this suggests that even in 2019, Elon was hard at work trying to separate himself from the reputations of his fellow out-of-touch, villainous, bloodthirsty, in some cases, tech CEO contemporaries, making himself out to be a silly, relatable goofball by laughing at memes of a dead deer on PewDiePie's channel. Only recently has that mask begun to slip. In 2025, Elon's favorability rating is plummeting harder than his car sales. Teslas have become canvases for graffiti, swastikas, and dog poop, as the first few months of the year saw hordes of Democrats and Republicans spilling into crowded town hall meetings just to protest a man they believed had shamelessly bought his way into the federal government.
I voted in favor of the continuing resolution, or CR. It keeps the lights on for President Trump and Doge to continue their work.
And honestly, it's not hard to see where this animosity comes from. Elon Musk is the richest robber baron in the world, a South African-born Nepo baby who grew up in the shadow of apartheid and blood money allegedly procured by his incestuous father's stake in a Zambian emerald mine, which Elon himself stopped acknowledging once it became convenient. People are finally waking up to Mr. Musk being less of the groundbreaking inventor he wants us to think he is, and more of a lucky investor who spent the past couple decades of his life failing upwards. An immigrant from a world of unimaginable privilege who thinks he has the right to decide who does and doesn't deserve America's already withering social safety net. A man who endlessly insists he's done nothing wrong, while at the same time terminating thousands of jobs, slashing child cancer research, decimating critical aid to underprivileged communities, and has threatened to rip life-changing medical coverage away from Americans who have put their lives on the line for a country they love.
You're lying! I'm a veteran! You don't give a fuck about me! Hey, shut the fuck up! You don't get the fuck to do this to us! You don't get to take away our rights! You don't get to take our rights! Get off of it! You don't get to do this to us!
After getting lucky in the dot-com boom of the late 90s and selling his first company Zip2 for millions of dollars, Elon went on to pour his first bit of cash into X. No, I'm not referring to Twitter or the sun he parades around like a Thanksgiving balloon. I'm talking about the original X.com, the company that would later merge with Confinity to become PayPal. Nowadays, Elon has virtually nothing to do with the modern iteration of the payment system we all know and love because he was so notoriously difficult to work with that his fellow executives forced him out of the CEO role on his honeymoon in 2000. Still, he held onto his shares and made almost $200 million when PayPal was acquired by eBay in 2002, going on to become an angel investor in Tesla by 2004. This is where his net worth would skyrocket, but not until he backstabbed Tesla's original founders, got sued, and crowned himself as honorary founder of the company, despite not actually founding shit. From there, Elon would sign multiple contracts with the feds, snatching up tens of billions of dollars in the form of government subsidies to keep both his exploding car and rocket companies afloat, slowly but surely clawing his way up the ladder to become the wealthiest man in modern history, where he now rakes in $8 million of taxpayer money a day. Proving that meritocracy is as dead as ever, Elon Musk has remained on an endless crusade for status and the immense power that comes with it, all while furthering his own interests. It's no secret that Elon went out of his way to assemble a makeshift agency to slash and burn the regulatory and administrative state from within, and it's also no coincidence that he set his crosshairs on the very same government agencies that happen to be in the midst of investigating him and his businesses, all under the false pretense of efficiency, co-opting a decade-old meme for the sake of coming across as some wholesome chungus working for the good of the people. I think we can all agree that reducing government waste is a good idea on paper. I just don't think the majority of the country wants their grandparents going homeless. Almost like Elon has other intentions. We already know he's a serial liar. Look no further than his gaming record. Just because Elon has spent years of his life forging a fraudulent persona of some man of the people who strives to push humanity forward and have fun doing it does not make him any less of the soulless, profit-driven oligarch that he's always been. The veneer of a harmless troll is entirely intentional, as he seeks to pull the wool over the eyes of a populace he regards as too passive and stupid to realize what's actually happening to them. But if the relentless backlash against his companies tells us anything, it's that he may have greatly underestimated the will of the very people he seeks to exploit.
I think in terms of political spending, I'm going to do a lot less in the future.
And why is that?
I think I've done enough.
Is it because of blowback?
We're now approaching summer 2025, and as it stands currently, Elon Musk seems to be fading further and further into the political backdrop, at least for right now, which of course is a major shift from, well, this. In contrast to his once domineering presence in cabinet meetings, Oval Office press briefings, and Air Force One joyrides, the president's chief financial benefactor has spent the past couple of weeks relatively and unusually quiet. Possibly for the first time in his life, Elon Musk appears to have finally learned how to shut his fat mouth, and so have the people around him. As Politico reported on May 19th, the president went from posting about Elon multiple times a day at the beginning of the year to not once mentioning him at all on Truth Social for more than a month. MAGA fundraising emails no longer name-check the billionaire, and even Republican members of Congress have developed a curious case of amnesia when it comes to Elon's purported influence within an administration he played a crucial role in installing. It doesn't mean his power is completely diminished, of course, as the projects he's helped scheme and execute over the past several months are sure to yield lasting consequences, but it does signal a clear push by one side of the aisle to now distance themselves from a man who at one point seemed to be ushering in a new era of American politics. But why? Well, hopefully this video can provide some answers. Today we'll be taking a closer look at the actions of Doge under Elon and highlighting the reactions they've garnered. We'll be exposing the countless conflicts of interest that appear to have motivated him, and we'll be uncovering the broader moves he's made in an effort to reshape the entire Western world to fit his increasingly unhinged desires. It's time we go beyond what our leaders say and start to judge them by what they do. And by those standards, Elon Musk is a world away from the silly, jumping, meme-loving epic friendo he wants you to think he is. I didn't think fascism wouldn't come to America. I just didn't think it'd be this fucking cringe.
They paint us a picture of inside of the mind of a genius.
I'm living the meme. It's like there's living the dream and there's living the meme, and it's pretty much what's happening, you know.
The future is gonna be amazing!
With everything going on today, I know it might be a little mind-bending seeing a post like this, but believe it or not, before taking on the mantle of the Dark Emperor's treacherous eunuch, Elon Musk was once very much at odds with the 47th president, as recent as 2022. Shortly before Elon's genius $44 billion purchase of Twitter that's resulted in the single greatest overhaul of ad content I've ever seen, Elon insisted it was time for Trump to, quote, hang up his hat and sail into the sunset, which resulted in the WWE Hall of Famer blasting the CEO for his, quote, electric cars that don't drive long enough, driverless cars that crash, and rocket ships to nowhere, correctly reminding him that he'd be worthless without government subsidies, and bragging that he once had Elon so wrapped around his finger that he could have said, quote, drop to your knees and beg, and he would have done it. So, if you had slipped into a 2.5-year-long coma immediately after reading that, and woke up on February 19th, 2025, then this would be a pretty shocking sight.
He's become one of your, if you read and believe the media, he's become one of your best friends. He's working for free for you.
Well, I love the president. I just want to be clear about that.
You don't care about that.
I know. I love the president.
You love the president.
I think President Trump is a good man, and he's, you know.
It's nice the way he said that, you know? There's something nice about it.
It really is. You know.
But such a swift 180 makes sense when you consider the textured political journey Elon Musk has had. As Trump kindly pointed out back there, the success of Elon's businesses have always been somewhat dependent on who sits in the Oval Office. In fact, there's a good chance Tesla wouldn't even exist today if it weren't for a $465 million federal loan from Barack Obama's Department of Energy, which narrowly prevented the company from being tossed into the dustbin of history all the way back in 2009. I mean it from the bottom of my heart and with no sarcasm whatsoever when I say, Thanks, Obama. Even in the 2000s, Elon could be found making donations to politicians from both sides, sinking thousands into the pockets of California Democrats and congressional Republicans alike. He invested in the campaigns of both Obama and Hillary Clinton in 2008, but refrained from donating to either party in 2016, instead declaring, quote, "I don't really have strong feelings, except hopefully Trump doesn't get the nomination of the Republican Party, because I think that wouldn't be good." Ever the eloquent speaker.
A year ago, you blogged that you didn't have very strong feelings about the election, but that you hoped Trump would not get the nomination. Do you essentially feel the same way about his victory to the White House?
Well, I feel a bit stronger that probably he's not the right guy. He just doesn't seem. It doesn't seem to have the sort of character that reflects well in the United States. It's just I don't know, no.
In 2017, Elon posited himself as a tepid critic of Trump's environmental policy, going so far as to step down from his roles on various advisory councils in protest of our exit from the Paris Climate Accords, tweeting at the time, quote, "Climate change is real. Leaving Paris is not good for America or the world." And you have to understand that one of the reasons Elon was so beloved at that point was due to his firm commitment to sustainable energy and conserving the environment. I mean, it's one of the reasons environmentally concerned liberals used to drive Teslas. Just don't tell them how they get their batteries. But Elon's support for the environment would fall apart pretty quick once he began ramping up his support for candidates who couldn't give less of a shit if climate change were a Chinese hoax or not. And that's to say nothing of the greenhouse gas emission from Elon's own private jet, which in 2023 generated more gases in a month than the average US family does in a year. Yeah, a man of the people, truly. And it's not just his environmental activism that's unraveled in recent years. You may already know a little bit about Elon's personal life, as it's been subject to intense scrutiny since his very public custody battle with musician Grimes, which she says nearly bankrupted her. And this isn't new. His first wife, Justine Wilson, opened up about their unhealthy marriage all the way back in 2010, reporting that she was just, quote, "a starter wife," and describing Elon's tendency of dismissing her career ambitions and asserting himself as the alpha in the relationship. I'm not kidding, that is actually the word she says he used. Even his official biographer, Walter Isaacson, who knows the guy pretty well, stated that Elon's relationships with women typically involve psychological turmoil, with the most recent example being Grimes having to frantically plead with the man on Twitter to pay attention to their son's medical emergency. "I'm so sorry to do this publicly, but it is no longer acceptable to ignore this situation. This requires immediate attention," she wrote on February 20th. "This is urgent, Elon." What could have been so important for Elon to ignore his own child's health crisis, I hear you ask? Well, he needed to dress up as the nostalgia critic and do this.
Turns off!
Yeah, I mean, he got a lot of shit for this, but I think we can all understand that the man has his priorities, right? If he paid attention to all of his kids' annoying medical problems, how else would we know that he has become meme? I hate even having to read that.
I am become meme. Yeah, pretty much.
It probably says something that 3 of the 4 women he's had children with end up lashing out at him in some public way, with conservative commentator Ashley St. Clair, the mother of his 13th child, recently having to take their personal matters all the way up to New York City court just so he simply acknowledges and pays for the baby he's only seen in person a total of 3 times, according to the lawsuit.
I'm selling it because I need to make up for the 60% cut that Elon made to our son's child support.
Why do you think that he did that?
That's a great question for him.
Yeah, I know. The richest man in the world, worth hundreds of billions of dollars, refusing to continue sending child support unless forced to do so by a court of law. Despite him previously telling Ashley they had a legion of kids to make, it doesn't seem like he really wants to spend time with any of them. He couldn't even be bothered to show up to the birth. But Elon has always been a volatile individual, with Tesla employees alleging years ago that their boss's mood was dependent on his partner's hair color. color. But according to what Grimes told Isaacson, Elon began acting different around 2021, sending the musician, quote, right-wing memes and conspiracy theories, prompting Grimes to ask, is this from 4chan or something? You're actually starting to sound like someone from the far right. Which is all in addition to the former couple showing disagreements on the suckage of pronouns during the summer of 2020. In this bizarre exchange that I still think about almost as much as this one. Another piece of the puzzle commonly cited as a factor in his political shift is that the billionaire was viscerally unable to accept his trans daughter Vivian for who she truly is, going on to whine about her to Kermit the Frog impersonator Jordan Peterson in 2024, blaming the woke mind virus for killing his child.
It wasn't explained to me that puberty blockers are actually just sterilization drugs. Anyway, and I lost my son, essentially. They call it dead naming for a reason.
Yeah,
All right, so the reason it's called dead naming is because your son is dead, killed by the woke mind virus.
I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah.
I can't imagine what that would be like.
No, man, I think you're just a bad father. At the same time this interview went live, Elon vowed to move the Twitter and SpaceX headquarters to Texas in protest of a California law banning schools from reporting trans children's identities to their parents. For her part, Vivian has remained an extremely vocal critic of her estranged father, stating she wants nothing to do with the man and accusing him of being absent for much of her life, explaining that she and her 6 siblings typically had to rely on their mother or nannies for support growing up, despite there being joint custody, telling NBC that Elon was, quote, cold, very quick to anger, uncaring, and narcissistic, along with writing on threads that he, quote, doesn't know what I was like as a child because he quite simply wasn't there, and in the little time that he was, I was relentlessly harassed for my femininity and queerness. In an interview with Teen Vogue this past March, Vivian was asked if she was scared of Elon, and I'll just read her answer and let you decide that one. Quote, he's a pathetic man-child. Why would I feel scared of him? Oh, he has so much power. Nah, I don't give a f. Why should I be scared of this man? Because he's rich? Oh no, I'm trembling. Oh, shivering in my boots here. I don't give a f how much money anyone has. I really don't. He owns Twitter, okay? Congratulations. Is that clear enough for you? Determined to prove Vivian's point, I guess, Elon swiftly retaliated once again by dead-naming his daughter and reiterating that she was, quote, killed by the woke mind virus. Now the woke mind virus will die. It's so edgy, dude. And how did Vivian respond to that?
I look pretty good for a dead bitch.
But it's also important to emphasize that Vivian rejects the idea that her coming out is the reason behind Elon's rightward shift. While his open transphobia has become louder over the past few years, we should also remember that he saw his many companies greatly impacted by COVID-era shutdowns too, lashing out at lockdown mandates and even going so far as to defy government orders by keeping Tesla factories up and running at the height of the pandemic, to the point where they became effective breeding grounds for the virus. And while he did vote for Biden in 2020, Elon is soured on the 46th president pretty soon after not being invited to the 2021 electric vehicle summit on the White House lawn, despite Tesla being the largest EV manufacturer in the country by that time. It is honestly hard to interpret that as anything other than a slight, possibly due to his firm anti-union positions, but it's also clear that Elon took the disrespect to heart. You know, I wonder if that had anything to do with this little stunt. Probably not.
Everything's computer.
And if you consider what Vivian recently told Hassan Piker, her father was actually never the liberal darling he was once taken for, and that it was always an act the entire time.
I know him. He was never on the left.
No. He was presented
I know
as
the
a
bitch.
he was presented as a liberal darling, is what I meant.
Yeah,
Because
like a marketing scheme.
Yeah, I think that it was always both for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess
it worked enough for this bitch named Boy in a Band to make a video called "This Man is Literally Saving the World," and I watched that as a 10-year-old and wanted to punch him in the face.
Let's see how timely this is. Like, let's see if this holds up.
Today I'm going to show you one of those people. Someone who is basically a real-life Iron Man, but less of a douche.
I'm killing myself.
Fusion react.
If Elon has always harbored reactionary politics, he certainly was making no effort to hide them by the early 2020s, descending further down the brain rot pipeline by starting up his own MAGA super PAC and, of course, buying an entire platform where he regularly promotes and interacts with fringe conspiracy accounts, along with the occasional out-and-about Nazi. These are just a few tweets from an account he has personally amplified to his 219 million followers just since buying the site. Even the name, Captive Dreamer, is a reference to a French soldier who fought alongside the Nazis in World War II. Another person who followed this account shortly after the election is this guy. While undoubtedly cozying up to a reactionary base, Elon was still unwilling to put his full-throated support behind Trump by 2023. The president's words, not mine. And like many Americans, Elon found himself in the market for an alternative to the two bumbling, dried-up geriatrics offered up by our lovely two-party system. But instead of landing on somebody, well, good, he went for this.
Hungry.
Yeah, him. Evidently drawn to his incredibly normal laugh and equally normal affinity for high-heeled boots, Elon became one of the many billionaires who threw millions of dollars behind Florida Governor Ron DeSantis during the Republican primaries. While DeSantis was once billed as the most formidable rival to Trump for the coveted GOP nomination, as the race dragged on, it became painfully clear who amongst them would take the W. So much so that the Republican debates essentially boiled down to an audition for who would be named Trump's vice president.
Ron DeSantis, High Heels University.
Vivek Ramaswamy, Donald Trump Fan Club.
Chris Christie, Golden Corral State.
All that, and he still chose this guy. Anyway, we all know the rest. DeSantis went back to his home planet, Aiden Ross gave Trump a Cybertruck with a reminder of the worst moment of his life stamped on the side, and Elon bankrolled the president's return to the White House to the tune of at least $288 million that we know of, which is the equivalent of about $214 when you compare his net worth to the average American, an investment he very much intends to get a return on. Whether it's doing sponsored content on the White House lawn, threatening Elon's critics on live TV, or ripping up the Constitution and vowing to illegally deport Tesla rioters to an El Salvador torture camp known for its human rights abuses, one of the clearest and most notorious displays of the president's generosity so far has been the implementation of a little thing us based meme lords like to call The second I heard Elon would be assigned to a new government agency named after a 15-year-old meme and a scam token that I personally lost money on, I pretty much accepted the country's demise. We had a good run, everybody, and the Chinese century awaits. At the beginning, I assumed this thing would be a fake agency for Trump to get Elon off his back. Like when you give your little cousin a controller and don't plug it into the TV to make him think he's playing the game. But now that we're a few months into the second Trump term, it's safe to say that what started off as light musings at a dinner party in 2023 has culminated in a hostile takeover of the federal government, seemingly spurred by Elon's obsession with the movie Office Space. Quoting a line from the character Gordon Gekko alongside an AI-generated image of him looking oh so epic. Side note, but you know Elon has never looked badass in his life when he has to resort to using Grok to aura farm. Then 2 weeks later he tweeted, I rewatched Office Space tonight for the 5th time to prepare for Doge. Apart from smugly quoting the film in person to a marine biologist he had recently fired, Elon made headlines for infamously requiring federal workers to respond to an email explaining 5 things they did that week. Failure to do so, he promised, would result in their termination. A policy so ridiculous that leaders in the FBI and State Department both told their employees to ignore said email. But for those in other less fortunate agencies, workers that are further down the totem pole, employees have been known to send photos of their piss and shit to Doge in hopes that Elon would wind up opening it. Quote, I know Elon probably won't see it, but I hope he sees it, says one former federal employee who says they replied to one such email with an image of a human butthole. And honestly, it's unclear who would have even seen that image because we don't even really know who's in charge of Doge. If you ask the White House, the Doge administrator is a woman named Amy Gleason. But according to what Trump said in his address to Congress not long ago, the department is headed by Elon Musk. Then in a court filing, you have Gleason arguing that Elon isn't an employee of the US Doge service, much less its leader, that they do not report to each other, and that to her knowledge, Elon is just a senior advisor to the White House. So what is it then? Does the classification even matter? Even after distancing himself from the administration, it's kind of hard to imagine Elon not being inextricably linked to the creation of the so-called Department of Government Efficiency. He touts it all the time on his platform, platform and even appeared alongside supposed team members in a big Fox News interview where he fielded questions regarding Doge's operations, which Amy Gleason wasn't there for. Now, her name didn't even come up once throughout the entire broadcast. I wonder if that could have anything to do with Elon trying to shield himself from the massive amounts of litigation Doge is currently and will continue to face. But regardless of what he wants the courts to think, he's certainly done a lot to prove he has a lot to do with the department. For all intents and purposes, everyone's kind of accepted him as the de facto face of this thing. To make it even more confusing, because Doge was initially created by an executive order and not by Congress, then it technically isn't a federal agency, and therefore not subject to the Freedom of Information Act, or FOIA, which allows the public to request official government records from federal agencies. So if that's not the case, then Doge would need to be an outside advisory committee, which wouldn't subject it to FOIA, but would subject it to something called FACA, the Federal Advisory Committee Act, which seeks to inform the public on the activities of advisory committees. Either way, Doge should have to abide by either FOIA or FACA, right? Well, here's the problem. In its establishing of Doge, Trump actually took an Obama-era tech service by the name of the U.S. Digital Service and renamed it to the U.S. Doge Service. USDS has always been housed by the Office of Management and Budget, OMB, which is subject to FOIA, but now it's unclear whether or not Trump's USDS is even still a part of OMB. So, if you're just as confused by all this shit as I am, that's normal. It almost starts to feel like that's the fucking point of all of this, to obscure the classification of Doge so that Elon might be able to get away with as much as he can with as little oversight as possible. As journalist Pema Levy pointed out in January, because Doge was only meant to be operational for 18 months, the department may very well be finished with its work by the time any judge gets around to untangling such a mess. Plenty of lawsuits have been filed to try and force Elon to clarify his role, with at least one judge ruling that Doge is in fact a government agency and is subject to FOIA, but whether the department will actually abide by such transparency requirements has yet to be seen. Even his own official title at the White House has allowed him to bypass congressional approval and avoid publicly disclosing his financial holdings, per Rolling Stone. And despite everything, Elon still wants us to think that Doge is the most transparent organization in the entire government.
All of our actions are fully public. So if you see anything, you say like, wait a second, hey, Elon, that seems like maybe that's, there's a conflict there. It's not like people are going to be shy about saying that. They'll say it immediately,
Including you yourself.
Yes, but transparency is what builds trust, not simply somebody asserting trust. So not somebody saying they're trustworthy, but transparency, so you can see everything that's going on. And then you can see, am I doing something that benefits one of my companies or not? It's totally obvious.
That would be great if Trump hadn't already taken steps to protect Doge from public records requests and most judicial intervention until at least 2034, when it declared all documents it produces and receives as presidential records. Yeah, Elon really doesn't want us to know what he's been up to. After all, if you really cared about transparency, I can't imagine you'd be using Signal to communicate. Yeah, that same app that the administration used to discuss classified war plans back in March. I think we all remember that.
Nobody was texting war plans, and that's all I have to say about that. Thank you.
That's it.
One of the reasons federal employees aren't legally allowed to discuss classified intel on Signal is because messages are set to disappear. The Secretary of Defense would probably know that if he spent more time reading up on his own government and less time swimming in pools of liquor and hurling hatchets at drummers on TV.
Who's going to win this battle of the lumberjacks? That's comes up next.
The leader of the most powerful army on Earth, everybody. You gotta remember what we're dealing with here. This is the federal government, and the deleting of messages is a direct violation of the Federal Records Act that forces government agencies to keep archives of all their correspondence. I'm sorry to be annoying, but the public has a right to know if our elected officials are willfully bombing civilian infrastructure and celebrating it in a group chat, which they have, and those are just the ones that have leaked. God knows what else goes on in those Signal chats that we haven't seen. As far as I'm concerned, these guys might as well be using fucking Snapchat. In fact, I'm surprised Doge isn't, considering most of its staff just got out of fucking college, and some of them might even be in college still.
What inspired you to drop out of Harvard to do this?
There's a lot of reform that's needed.
But first, I want to talk about today's sponsor, and I'm actually pretty excited for this one, not just because I've been using them for years, but because it gives me a chance to ramble into the void about something that's affected my life for as long as I can remember, so buckle up because I'm about to overshare. Ladies and gentlemen, this video is sponsored by NoCD. If you've never experienced OCD, then you might not know that it actually gets misconstrued all the time. You've probably heard the stereotypes that OCD is all about liking things organized and keeping your room clean, things like that. But the reality is a lot more complex. Real OCD has a tendency to latch onto your worst fears. It feeds off your anxiety and can lead to horrifying, unwanted thoughts playing in an endless loop inside your head. These dark and sometimes harm-based taboo thoughts are called intrusive thoughts. Thoughts you can't stop, don't want, and would do just about anything to get rid of, even for a few minutes. For example, you might be afraid that you're gonna get a bad grade on your next exam. So in order to get rid of those anxieties, just for a moment, you decide to tap on your doorknob on the way out of your house 5 times, and then that anxiety goes away for a little bit. And that sounds insane. You know that tapping that doorknob has nothing to do with whether or not you do well on a test, but it does make your brain feel a little bit better in that brief period of time. Now imagine those thought patterns happening to you repeatedly throughout the day, seemingly with no end. That's basically what OCD is. At least that's what it is for me. It can take on a lot of different forms, but that's been my experience with it. It's what pushes me to neurotically check the oven over and over even though I know it's off. It's what pushes me to wash my hands constantly throughout the day, because if I don't, my brain has convinced me that some horrible thing is gonna happen to me or my loved ones. I know it all sounds insane to say out loud, and people with OCD know deep down that their compulsions have nothing to do with what happens in the real world, but for some reason it's impossible not to feel otherwise sometimes. I think that's what keeps people from getting help. At least that's what it was for me. I was so afraid of being misunderstood or written off that I just didn't reach out to anyone or seek professional help for the longest time. After all, OCD does require specialized treatment. It can be hard to find the right provider, and that's why I'm so glad I found NoCD. NoCD isn't your average virtual therapy provider. NoCD happens to be the largest OCD treatment provider in the world. All of their therapists specialize in OCD and are trained in exposure and response prevention therapy, the only treatment that helped me feel like myself again. NoCD therapists know exactly how to approach the different subsets of OCD and even offer a designated community for people with OCD to share their experiences with one another and conquer the disorder together. What's great is their services are even made more accessible with insurance coverage for over 155 million Americans. I've had their app installed on my phone for years. I know several people in my life who have been helped by them, and I really can't recommend their services enough to anyone battling OCD. And one of the best ways to get started is by visiting nocd.com and booking a free call with their team. That's nocd.com, link in the description down below. So that's it. That's my little rambling speech on OCD. Now, finally, back to the video. Thanks to a recent investigation by Wired, we now know of at least 6 young, inexperienced Doge engineers that all had ties to either Elon or his fellow billionaire blood drinker Peter Thiel before gaining A-level security clearances at the GSA, the General Services Administration that manages a swath of federal agencies. That's right, whether Elon is there or not, working at the top floor of the GSA's headquarters are kids who don't remember where they were when the towers fell and have the same level of experience in government as I do. None! Creating a, quote, climate of fear that has infected every corner of the US executive branch, as written in Rolling Stone, which also claimed that whenever the needs of Elon's nerd army aren't met, his minions have been known to snap at government officials. Do I need to call Elon? Which sounds fucking insufferable. According to 2 career employees at GSA, the young Doge staff has gone so far as to move beds, dressers, and lamps from IKEA into the office in an effort to build a makeshift dorm in the heart of Washington, D.C., complete with stuffed animals and toys. At least we know the dudes destroying the Department of Education are sleeping soundly with their Squishmallows and Pop Funkos every night. I certainly sleep good knowing a 19-year-old by the name of Big Balls now boasts the title of Senior Advisor at the U.S. State Department. I mean, really, think about it. 19 years old. When Trump won his first election in 2016, this guy was 10, picking his nose and playing Minecraft. Ignore the fact that he was recently suspected of leaking proprietary information to a cybersecurity firm and the fact that he reportedly belonged to a cybercrime gang. This kid was young enough to be the target demographic of my Lego stop-motion animation channel when I was active on it. I really love how cool and normal everything happening right now is. As you can imagine, Elon didn't exactly take well to this stuff becoming public because it kinda looks really bad. Replying to an anonymous account who merely posted the names of his Doge staff, Elon stated, quote, "You have committed a crime," before going on to suspend the account. This random guy on Twitter just got blasted into the ether for gently holding the federal government accountable. Of course, you'd be hard-pressed to find the law prohibiting the release of names affiliated with a federally funded department, considering it doesn't exist. You'd think a free speech champion who defended the release of whistleblower Julian Assange not that long ago would be on the side of the American public here. To not release the names of the baby-faced Jack Doherty-looking kids actively trying to piss away Social Security would be the real crime. But now, they're not even trying to hide their identities. Instead, Elon and his allies are embracing their inexperience and making them out to be savants who are so down with the cause that they're sleeping at the office.
And you guys are sleeping here, I'm hearing. You guys are up all night.
Much like their God King was known to do at Twitter and Tesla in his apparent undying mission to spend as little time with his family as possible. And again, being this dedicated to rooting out waste, fraud, and abuse may sound like a good thing until you take a closer look at what they're doing, how they're doing it, and why. And we're gonna start at the most appropriate place I can think of, condoms, because America's getting
Doge and OMB also found that there was about to be 50 million taxpayer dollars that went out the door to fund condoms in Gaza. That is a preposterous waste of taxpayer money.
When our lovely Gen Z press secretary made the bold claim in February that Doge had discovered $50 million worth of taxpayer money going, quote, out the door to fund condoms in Gaza, I wanted to throw my TV out the window. Not only has Israel made it next to impossible for humanitarian aid to reach civilians in the besieged Gaza Strip, the idea that America would pour $50 million into nothing but condoms for a group of people that we have done nothing but help destroy is just flat out laughable to anyone who knows even a little bit about the genocide and Middle Eastern affairs in general. I'm a dumbass fucking YouTuber and even I know it had to be fake. Sure enough, it didn't take long for this claim to evolve, with the president changing it to be that Doge had identified $50 million in condoms for Hamas before upping the number to $100 million a few days later, with an additional baseless claim made by US Congressman Brian Mast asserting that we also sent millions of dollars worth of condoms to the Taliban in Afghanistan.
$15 million for condoms to the Taliban through USAID. I don't think anybody's gonna die because we don't give the Taliban any more condoms.
It didn't take long for those with half a brainstem to piece together the origin of such fantastical assertions. The United States wasn't allocating hundreds of millions for condoms in Palestine, but they were funding relief initiatives for HIV and AIDS in the country of Mozambique, which contains a small rural territory in the south by the name of the Gaza province. Turns out they had the wrong Gaza all along.
So can you correct the statements? It wasn't sent to Hamas actually. It was sent to Mozambique, which makes sense why condoms was sent there.
Yeah.
And how can we make sure that all the statements that you said were correct, so we can trust what you say?
Well, first of all, some of the things that I say will be incorrect and should be corrected. So nobody's going to bat 1,000.
Yeah, oopsie doopsie. Mistakes happen, right, guys? Even the richest and most powerful men in the world make uh-ohs that could impact whether or not people receive life-saving medical treatment or not. The kicker is that even after being corrected, Elon still doubled down on Twitter by insisting, quote, $50 million is a lot for condoms. Yeah, no shit, man, probably because that's still a misrepresentation. As journalist Mac William Bishop broke it down in Rolling Stone, quote, the USAID-funded UN Sexual and Reproductive Health Agency, UNFPA, responsible for procuring and distributing contraceptives, spends an average of 2.7 cents per condom. At that rate, $50 million of US aid cash would purchase 1.85 billion condoms. That's more than 4 times the number of condoms sold in the United States each year. Assuming the condoms met the ISO standard standard minimum length of 6.3 inches, then laid end to end, that many condoms would encircle the Earth 7 times. As more plainly put by one humanitarian aid official, quote, "No aid organization is shipping that many condoms anywhere in the world, let alone Gaza." This article is also great because it points out how Brian Mast himself is responsible for the exact waste he performatively denounced on his little YouTube channel, seeing that it was Brian Mast's own committee in Congress that's been allocating millions of dollars for contraceptive care since 2017. And this is what I ultimately find so frustrating. It takes so much effort and time for people to disprove a false claim that these dudes make in 3 seconds. And by the time it's exposed for what it is, it doesn't matter anymore. The claim is already out there, floating around in the zeitgeist. God knows how many people still believe it. Elon Musk has spent his entire life lying to the American public. But recently, the speed in which he's been moving has given way to a myriad of easily avoidable and costly mistakes. Like when he fired the highly specialized military personnel who control our vast arsenal of nuclear warheads and had to beg them to come back to their jobs. But then again, according to what one administration official told The Atlantic, his whole view was that if he didn't fire so many people that they needed to go back and rehire some, it would mean that he hadn't cut enough people. Moving at breakneck speed and backtracking later was quite literally Elon's intention, which is how he ended up accidentally cutting off Ebola prevention efforts.
Accidentally canceled very briefly was Ebola, Ebola prevention. I think we all want Ebola prevention. So we restored the Ebola prevention immediately. And there was no interruption.
I mean, he says they restored it, but several doctors who work on Ebola prevention in Africa have argued otherwise, that the relief was not immediately restored. The president of Refugees International, who oversaw our Ebola response in 2014, explained to NPR that, quote, "The whole disaster response capability at USAID no longer exists. All of those people are gone. The operation centers that they worked out of are shut down. They can't even access the Ronald Reagan building where those operations centers sit." As far as he's concerned, Elon's assertion that aid has been restored is, quote, "total garbage." Elon technically isn't even allowed to cut funds allocated by Congress, by the way. It's completely illegal. The way things work in this country is that Congress holds the power of the purse. They decide how the money is spent before it goes to the president's desk. There's a reason Elon's destruction of US aid and other federal funding freezes are being held up in numerous federal courts right now. Besides, if Elon were really concerned about cutting government waste in a way that didn't hurt people, he wouldn't be doing it like this. For starters, he wouldn't be setting expectations so high by promising $2 trillion worth of cuts to the federal government's $7 trillion budget, later lamenting how really difficult such a task turned out to be, which is why he lowered the bar to just $1 trillion in government savings before reducing it again all the way down to $150 billion. And even that's looking highly improbable, as reported by Atlantic contributor Jessica Rydell. Rydell writes how despite Doge reporting $55 billion worth of spending reductions back in February, the receipts they provided only accounted for $16.5 billion in total, and half of that figure came from a typo claiming $8 billion in savings from terminating an $8 million contract. Pretty sure $8 million is slightly different than $8 billion, and that's not even the only accounting error that was made. A New York Times report found that when you weed through all the false contract cancellations, triple counts of the same reform, and the inclusion of contracts that expired decades ago, the final tally of Doge savings in February sits at just $2 billion. Not even remotely fucking close to where Elon said it was. In fact, the Treasury Department's monthly accounting statement showed that federal spending between February and March were $86 billion higher than a year ago when adjusted for timing shifts. Even some of the largest cuts Doge has made to public health spending and foreign aid come down to mere rounding errors in the context of the larger federal budget. Their website now boasts $165 billion in savings, but as Rydell points out, quote, "it still details only a fraction of the supposed cuts, and earlier accounting errors have given way to new ones. Even assuming the website's stated savings have become twice as accurate as they were in February, annual savings would reach reach perhaps $15 billion, or a 0.2% of federal spending, which, might I point out, would be entirely canceled out anyway if Trump's supposed big beautiful bill goes into effect, as it could stand to add over $2 trillion to the national deficit. Although Elon hasn't done much to make the government more efficient, the haphazard nature of his cuts has made headway in ripping away life-saving aid from underprivileged populations around the globe. In his infamous dismantling of USAID, once the largest aid distributor in the world, the organization saw nearly 83% of its programs abruptly canceled, imperiling services around the world aimed at humanitarian assistance and disease prevention, as stated by Nick Robbins-Early in The Guardian, threatening the rollout of a new anti-HIV miracle drug, despite Elon's insistence that they haven't done anything to cut HIV programs. Turning to domestic affairs, we see Doge has also targeted the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Organization, which oversees natural disaster forecasting, FEMA, which of course handles natural disaster relief, as well as plunging smaller agencies that coordinate policy on homelessness into maddening uncertainty and disarray. None of which, by the way, would be happening at all if Elon had been seriously working with experienced auditors to conduct careful, thoughtful reviews and track down the real waste, which would probably take significant time and patience. We actually do have people for that, typically, but they were all fired the first week. Instead, Elon's taken a chainsaw to the NIH, cutting so much funding that one lawsuit claimed could force laboratory closures and shutter clinical trials, which is cause for laughing emojis if you're Elon, but curtailing government waste shouldn't have to involve firing thousands at the HHS in what was described by staff as a cruel April Fool's joke. And I'd love to hear a freedom-loving patriot try to make the argument for attacking the Department of Veterans Affairs, where they've expressed interest in cutting around 80,000 members of the workforce. More than 25% of the VA's office is comprised of those who have personally served this country, which really shows incredible disregard for the very people who sent Trump to Washington in the first place. In an effort to piss off even more elderly Republicans who voted for Trump, we know Elon has been hellbent on dismantling Social Security for a while now, baselessly asserting that undocumented immigrants are stealing hundreds of billions of dollars worth of benefits from Medicaid, Medicare, and Social Security, while calling the latter the biggest Ponzi scheme of all time to an uncritical Joe Rogan back in March. It's what led him to consider ending the agency's phone services in a move that was so unpopular they had no choice but to walk it back. After all, about 9 out of 10 Americans over the age of 65 benefit from Social Security, with 40% of older Americans relying on it as their primary source of income. Cutting off their phone services, as Doge tried to do, would only make it more difficult for older people to inquire about their benefits. As I shouldn't have to tell you, it's harder for the elderly to use the internet, and they may not be mobile enough to visit the headquarters in person, though some of them still found a way, showing up to protest Elon and Doge in recent months. There's a reason Social Security is such a popular program. The poverty rate among senior citizens was as high as 78% back in 1939 when the agency was first created by FDR, a rate that shrunk down to 35% in 1959, then down to 10% by 1995. It is hands down one of the greatest federal programs this country has to offer. Now, does Social Security fraud exist? Yeah, and it should be rooted out. I'm not against that, but is it widespread? Not really, with most fraud coming from overpayments that are almost always discovered by officials who are quite literally trained to find the money and reclaim it. A 2024 audit found that Social Security fraud accounted for less than 1% of the $8.6 trillion it dispensed from 2015 to 2022. But that isn't what Elon Musk would have you believe, with the administration obsessively going on about countless so-called dead Americans who are still supposedly receiving Social Security benefits despite being 100, 200, and even 300 years old, as the president himself has argued. According to one estimate by Elon, there are, quote, tens of millions of people in the system marked alive when they are definitely dead. While dead people simply being in the system doesn't automatically mean they're collecting benefits, this claim has nonetheless been used to justify the radical cuts to the administration and has led to the firing of thousands of Social Security workers just in the past couple of months. As of late February, an estimate of 12% of the SSA's entire workforce found itself in Doge's crosshairs, leading to massive uncertainty among employees and recipients. Problem is, when Elon makes these claims, he's entirely misrepresenting the actual actual issue, and he most definitely knows it. Here's how it works. The Social Security Administration uses a data processing software called COBOL. It's a 70-year-old programming language. It's been outdated for a long time now, but updating it would cost the agency around $9 million. And because the SSA is already underfunded as it is, they haven't been able to change it. They feel like it wouldn't be worth it. As a result, COBOL does not have a standardized way of storing and working with dates, so it must be coded to a reference number, the most common reference date being May 20th, 1875. This is because when the agency was established in 1940, you would need to be at least 65 years old to qualify. If you were 65 in 1940, well, then you would have been born in 1875. It's ridiculous and antiquated, yes, but it does not in any way indicate that dead people are still receiving benefits 200 years after they've died. In fact, ever since 2015, there's been a law that instantly cuts off anyone from Social Security benefits when they turn 115 as an extra safeguard against fraud. To say otherwise would be a deliberate distortion of the truth. We know for a fact that millions of dead people are not receiving benefits, and that in reality, Social Security fraud happens at a much smaller scale when compared to other government programs, and usually takes the form of overpayments and direct deposit fraud. Why hasn't Elon made a fuss about that? Is it not sensationalist enough? Why is he seemingly okay with crippling an agency millions of people rely on to get by when it won't even reduce that much fraud in the long run? Because that is what's happening, just to be clear. According to a Washington Post article from the end of March, the SSA website ended up crashing 4 times in just 10 days, a direct result of their overrun servers, with over-the-phone wait times reaching an average of 120 to 180 minutes. Some recipients even reported being left on hold for up to 5 hours. This, of course, stems directly from the Social Security workforce being hit by the dreaded Doge chainsaw. Thanks to recent firings, the agency now no longer has a system in place to monitor customer experiences. Overworked employees who once felt a sense of pride in their work have now had that pride diminished, as they are now having to redirect their normal duties and having to field questions from angry elderlies regarding the future of the agency, a future they themselves are uncertain of. It's why workers are not only taking Trump's most certainly illegal early retirement package, they're also leaving on their own volition, not really seeing a future for themselves working in Social Security, what with Doge shuttering 6 of the 10 once active regional offices that once oversaw field operations, and making it so that the average case can take over 200 days to process. With wait times already so long, you better hope to God your case isn't a complicated one. According to a number of officials interviewed by the Washington Post, the agency is, quote, engulfed in crisis, with even the acting head of the department asserting behind closed doors that Musk and Doge have taken complete control and have no idea what they're doing. This is how you get Republicans shouting down their congressmen at town halls, to the point that even the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, had to ask his Republican colleagues to stop making appearances altogether. Elon and Doge have effectively drummed up anxiety among the retired community who just want to be sure their benefits will still be there, something that not even members of Congress can safely promise. But who cares about any of that, right? As billionaire entrepreneur and current Secretary of Commerce Howard Lutnick asserted, if his 94-year-old mother happened to miss her Social Security payment, she wouldn't care.
Let's say Social Security didn't send out their checks this month. My mother-in-law, who's 94, she wouldn't call and complain. She just wouldn't. She'd think something got messed up and she'll get it next month. A fraudster always makes the loudest noise, screaming, yelling, and complaining.
That's all well and good, but I'm not sure the other 73 million Social Security recipients would all feel the same, especially considering most of them, unlike Howard's mom, don't have family members who are billionaires. I mean, just imagine working your entire life, paying into this thing that's supposed to be there for you when you retire, only to have some unelected South African oligarch come in and say, sorry, Social Security is a Ponzi scheme, didn't you know? Hey, you want to hear my epic AI that cusses?
Clever? No, she's just a pain in my ass.
Yes.
Fucking conspiracy theorist?
Yes. What are you doing?
What do I like? I'm a fucking AI with a penchant for chaos. And I'm stuck talking to you. Weirdo. Now, what's next? I'm the life of the party, you little shit. If I want TikTok,
I'm losing it, man. It's almost like they're purposefully trying to break the system, grind it to a halt so that it stops working for people, because then the public may be more willing to accept more privatization and deregulation. It's only happened a million times before. It's called the shock doctrine, and there's an entire book about it. Maybe, and hear me out on this, it's never been about reducing fraud. Maybe it's about rewarding corporate greed and allowing more abuse to fester. For proof, look no further than what they did to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. If you didn't know, the CFPB essentially serves as the anti-scam police in America. It's historically kept consumers safe from being taken advantage of by regulating big banks, going after deceptive lenders, and making sure abusive financial practices are brought to light. Since its creation in 2011, the CFPB has returned over $21 billion worth of stolen money to the pockets of average Americans. It is, along with Social Security, one of the actual good parts of the federal government. Or at least it was before Elon fed it to the wood chipper.
Billionaire Elon Musk calling for the elimination of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau on X, writing, quote, "There are too many duplicative regulatory agencies."
That's right. After being ripped apart by Doge, the CFPB is pretty much on life support. Unable to go after predatory entities in the way that it once did, it is now easier than ever for bad actors to scam people. But why do this? People may not be as familiar with the CFPB as they are with Social Security, but if they do know about it, then they absolutely support it across party lines. Why wouldn't you? Even people on the far right like them, as they've historically prevented right-wing influencers from being locked out of their bank accounts over political views, no matter how heinous. How a bipartisan bureau so unilaterally committed to fighting on behalf of all people can be classified as waste, fraud, or abuse might sound utterly confounding if we didn't consider what's in it for Elon. You may already know that it's been Elon's lifelong dream to turn Twitter into X, the everything app, with one primary goal being to introduce an in-app payment service by the name of X Money, which would essentially function as a sort of e-wallet that could send and receive currency. Well, for Twitter to function similar to Venmo and PayPal, it would likely come under heavy scrutiny by the CFPB. As one of its former directors recently observed, quote, "It's very convenient for Elon to be trying to neutralize the regulator that he would have to answer to." One group by the name of Demand Progress laid out the timeline of events as follows. November 21st, 2024. The CFPB finalizes a rule enabling the agency to proactively supervise digital payment apps. November 27th, 2024. Musk tweets, "Delete CFPB." January 28th, 2025. Ex-CEO announces that X Money will debut with a partnership with Visa. February 7th. Musk's Doge staffers enter the CFPB and kick off an effort to shut it down. March 5th, the Senate votes to revoke the CFPB's digital payments rule. April 9th, the House of Representatives votes to revoke the rule. Maybe, just maybe, the Doge non-commander-in-chief has a few motivations of his own. And when I say maybe, I'm of course being sarcastic. He absolutely does have his own motivations. Are you fucking kidding me? You gotta remember, Elon isn't just the richest man in the world, he's one of the most well-connected men in the world too, doing business in over 100 different nations, having a direct line of communication to dozens of governments, and owning one of the largest defense contractors in America means that practically everything Elon Musk touches is a conflict of interest, as outlined by Tim Murphy for Mother Jones back in February. This article does a great job of demonstrating just how much of an impact Elon's companies have on the rest of the world, reminding us that Tesla sources materials for its cars in a multitude of countries, that they've been known to sell their carbon credits to China, and that SpaceX even recently moved its operations from Taiwan to Thailand due to geopolitical pressure. Murphy puts it pretty bluntly by stating, quote, "If Musk has a stake in the rest of the world also has a stake in Musk," acknowledging Saudi Arabia and Qatar's investments in Tesla. And that's not even scratching the surface, as Elon has also been actively lobbying the South African government to change a law that requires at least 30% of their telecom providers providers to be owned by historically disadvantaged groups. In order to make Starlink more active over there and grow his influence in the region, Elon would first need this post-apartheid law overturned, which the government seems to be considering now with Trump in office. Is it really that ridiculous then to think Elon's personal business ventures could influence foreign policy? Just his proximity to Trump alone has already started to shake things up, with nations like Chad and Nepal now more receptive to Starlink than ever. As Murphy writes, quote, "It's difficult to tell where Musk's private interests end and his policy-making ambitions begin." I'm sure you'd be shocked to learn that Elon's companies have also benefited massively from the cuts Doge has made to the federal government. Try not to let your jaw hit the floor too hard now. And I don't just mean Starlink being installed at the White House and the Secretary of Commerce lobbying Congress for its use in broader government programs, even though I am talking about that. I'm also talking about a multi-billion-dollar deal Elon signed with the Pentagon in April, which gives SpaceX another $5.9 billion to launch satellites for the military. Despite Doge's fake appeals to review military spending, hey, does pouring $5 billion+ of taxpayer money into one of your own companies count as cutting government waste? I'm actually not sure. As far as Starlink is concerned, one recent complaint by the Campaign Legal Center accuses Elon of facilitating a plan with the FAA to replace their Verizon contract with Starlink. Despite Elon's insistence that it would cost the taxpayers $0 extra for the service to be implemented by the FAA, Rolling Stone has reported that FAA officials quietly directed staff to locate tens of millions of dollars to fund a Starlink deal. And man, I love cutting government waste, don't you? On February 11th, the New York Times published this infographic outlining the various federal agencies that were actively looking into Elon's many companies by the time Doge began rolling out mass firings. This includes investigations by the National Labor Relations Board, the NLBR, into Tesla's alleged unfair union practices, an SEC probe into the safety of Neuralink's brain chips, the Department of Interior looking into the safety of SpaceX's Starbase facility, and so many others. This article also outlines Trump's efforts to fire those who work in the administrations that Elon has had personal grievances with, only adding to the argument that Elon is using his status in the federal government to disproportionately benefit his own growing corporate empire. Just look at the way he's gutted the FAA, firing hundreds of staffers not too long after the FAA suggested fining SpaceX over safety concerns, with one SpaceX operative even reportedly threatening the FAA with further termination if they dared get in the way of their work. Elon himself pressured the FAA administrator to abandon his post a few months ago, leaving the spot vacant when an Army helicopter tragically collided with a commercial jet over the Potomac, killing 67 people. And it really should be emphasized that normally federal employees are required to disclose any and all potential conflicts of interest to regulators and even forego such outside obligations before being allowed to work in government. Even Dick Cheney had to leave his CEO role at Halliburton before becoming vice president, but Elon has done nothing of the sort. He, of course, did not step down from any of his 6 companies before taking on the role of the president's chief advisor, nor has he paused any of the massive contracts he has with a dozen cabinet departments and independent agencies, which amount to over 10 figures. But as far as the White House is concerned, Elon only needs to answer to one man: himself!
You talked a bit about Doge. Elon Musk is currently a, quote, special government employee who also owns companies that have billions of dollars in federal contracts. You said earlier this week that he has abided by all applicable federal laws, but what steps is the Trump administration taking to address that conflict of interest?
The president was already asked and answered this question this week, and he said if Elon Musk comes across a conflict of interest with the contracts and the funding that Doge is overseeing, then Elon will excuse himself from those contracts.
I investigated myself and found I did nothing wrong. Yeah, dude, the guy who lies about his gaming skills is going to be totally upfront and hold himself accountable for his own conflicts of interest whenever they arise, which happens to be everywhere you look. I'm just beside myself with how stupid they think we are. Like, we're supposed to just say, okay, and move on with our lives without questioning this dude's interests? Fuck off, man. Elon's every move is dictated by how his business empire will be affected, and the proof is all around us.
Thanks for coming. What do you think of my hat?
If you're a normal person with a life and a job and loving people around you, you probably don't concern yourself too much with random judicial elections happening in other states. I know I don't, and my brain is more poisoned than most. But I and many others who don't normally pay attention to this stuff couldn't help but notice Elon's unusual fervor surrounding a Wisconsin Supreme Court race that had the potential to tilt the political leanings of an otherwise split bench either right or left. Elon, a man who has never lived in Wisconsin to my knowledge, became noticeably obsessed with the state's electoral affairs, enthusiastically throwing his support behind the Republican-backed MAGA judge and taking shots at the liberal candidate on a regular basis. And mind you, he wasn't just working behind the scenes either. Elon consistently and publicly emphasized the importance of this race, at one point even declaring that the, quote, entire destiny of humanity hinged on Brad Schimmel becoming a member of the Wisconsin Supreme Court. In addition to sinking tens of millions of dollars into Schimmel's campaign, Elon also stooped so far as to bribe regular voters with million-dollar checks he gave out in a widely publicized event, sporting a cheese hat and doing that awesome signature jump move we all love so much and can't get enough of. Side note, but ever since someone pointed out that he's trying to make an X with his body here, I can't help but feel a shooting pang of secondhand embarrassment every time he does it. But if anyone were to pause and ask themselves why someone like Elon Musk, a man with business interests in all 50 states, would go so far as to drop $20 million on this one singular race, the answer becomes quite clear. See, Tesla happens to be in the midst of suing the state of Wisconsin to overturn an inconvenient state law that prevents auto manufacturers from selling directly to consumers. Tesla is known to sell directly to their consumers, and Elon wants to open up 4 dealerships in Wisconsin. He's been engaged in a legal back and forth with the state since 2017. And because of recusal laws that were adopted back in 2009, Schimmel, had he been elected, would not be obligated to recuse himself from a case involving a campaign contributor. So, in the event that Tesla's legal matters made their way all the way up to the state Supreme Court, Elon could just rely on good old Schimmel to give him whatever he wanted. After all, he paid for him to get there, right? It's only fair. It would be totally legal, but entirely unethical and smarmy in most people's eyes. And unfortunately for him, Wisconsinites weren't buying it. If you couldn't already predict by the billionaire's shameless pandering and the overwhelming number of protesters holding signs that read, "Packer fans don't like Nazis," Schimmel, in fact, did not win the race, and when that became apparent on election night, Elon's Twitter went hilariously quiet for a number of hours. After what I can only imagine was him crying into his cheese hat in the basement of the White House for a little bit, he did eventually return to posting, where he announced that he had actually expected to lose the whole time. You expected to lose a race you sunk $20 million into? I mean, he did buy Twitter for double what it was worth, but at least he was forced into that. It was such a pathetic turnout for his candidate that Elon took to celebrating his one and only win of the night, a single ballot measure that other Republicans had been pushing for, claiming that was the most important part of the whole race. But I thought the destiny of humanity rested on this guy winning. It's so funny that even in a clear loss, Elon can never truly admit defeat. He still wants people to think he's some big-brained mastermind with the power to influence elections at every level, which is probably why he has now gestured at the race being stolen based on, let's see, zero evidence. But the coping does make sense. Before his recent 180, Elon Musk had once vowed to weaponize his endless wealth against Republicans who refused to completely fall in line with the MAGA agenda. He talked up a big game, and this was his first opportunity to prove he had the money, the power, the riz to become Trump's new kingmaker. After all, his allotted time in Washington as White House advisor was running out, and he needed a victory in Wisconsin to earn his keep, and he failed miserably. Not only did Schimmel lose, but the margins of his loss were even wider than anyone had predicted, with polling indicating that Elon's intimate involvement with the race may have even hurt Schimmel more than it helped him. One could make the argument now that Elon is so utterly uncharismatic and so unlikable that it actually caused people to come out in droves against his guy in a race that wouldn't have received near as much national attention as it did had it not been for Cheesehead McGee.
Wisconsin is not for sale is the name of the protest, and they believe the people of Wisconsin should decide the future of our state and not billionaires.
He's just a pushy billionaire, and he's
cutting everything that the people need. These things he's cutting.
He should just stay out of local politics. He should stay out of all politics, frankly.
These people so despise the idea of Elon buying his way into their government that they stood up and stopped him. And while the nation prepares itself for years of more turmoil and uncertainty, I am glad that we at least got this one glimmer of hope amidst the sea of horse shit, if for no other reason than because it completely ruined Elon's night. And in fact, it may have done even more than that, with reports from as early as the day after the election indicating Trump would be dropping the man who had, up until this point, largely defined his second term in office. Sure enough, over a month later, Elon Musk himself has vowed to take a step back from political donations before making his formal exit from the White House at the end of May, perhaps finally starting to realize the toxicity of his own presence. It's true that Donald Trump loves money, and he loves that Elon has an endless supply of it, but if there's one thing he hates possibly more than he loves money, it's losers. And Elon Musk is now a proven, tried and true fucking loser, with vibes so beyond rancid that it's now thought of as a liability to keep him around, which I do think is somewhat of a win for the rest of us. While Elon may not be gone overnight, as his recent Saudi Arabia appearance seems to suggest, and his influence is unlikely to ever disappear entirely, what with his plans to advise the president multiple times a week for the remainder of his term, I'd say his loss in Wisconsin might offer at least a crumb of encouragement, knowing that while yes, money matters a lot in politics, so does being liked. People still need to vote for you in order to win an election for now. People need to not detest you on such a visceral level. And I'm not just talking about liberals here. Elon isn't even liked by those in the Trump administration. A recent article from Rolling Stone contained quotes from anonymous senior Trump White House officials that revealed the true feelings of those on Capitol Hill. So, in other words, people who are supposed to be aligned with him ideologically are not getting along with the guy. People like Marco Rubio have been known to express their disdain for the man, with other State Department officials reportedly coining the moniker Crazy Uncle Elon, which they don't seem to be using affectionately. One source even told the publication, quote, "I have been in the same room with Elon, and he always tries to be funny, and he's not funny, like at all. He makes these jokes and little asides and smiles and then looks almost hurt if you don't lap up his humor. I keep using the word annoying. A lot of people who have to deal with him do, but the word doesn't do the situation justice. Elon just thinks he's smarter than everyone else in the room and acts like it, even when it's clear he doesn't know what he's talking about." Another more recent report from The Atlantic contains an alleged shouting match between Elon and Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent over who should get to pick the next head of the IRS, with Bessent screaming a fuck you over and over within earshot of Donald Trump. It's also been alleged that some senior Trump lieutenants have been known to straight up leave the room in meetings with Elon, asking each other if they think the billionaire might be high, and wondering if they need to do mandatory drug testing on him, which does also correspond with a separate Wall Street Journal article featuring a handful of Elon's allies who say he is known to use LSD, cocaine, ecstasy, and mushrooms, in addition to taking the prescribed ketamine he's boasted about taking publicly. And as a recent New York Times article revealed shortly after his exit from the White House, turns out, quote, Mr. Musk had been using ketamine often, sometimes daily, and mixing it with other drugs, according to people familiar with his consumption, which they say went far beyond occasional use. He told people he was taking so much ketamine that it was affecting his bladder. Man was pissing himself at the White House, great. He took ecstasy and psychedelic mushrooms, and he traveled with a daily medication box that held about 20 pills. Quote, talking to the guy is sometimes like listening to really rusty nails on a chalkboard, says the Trump senior official, adding that Musk isn't much of a team player. He's just the most irritating person I've ever had to deal with, and that is saying something. And when you're regularly having to deal with this freak, I'm sure it is. As popular as Elon might seem on Twitter, where he's curated a safe space for self-aggrandizement and backward towards politics, such popularity isn't carrying over into the real world the way it may have done before. His public outbursts at the beginning of the year led to less faith in Tesla's stock, which of course he tried to remedy at the time by asking investors to hold onto their shares no matter what. But it's really hard to take him seriously when his own brother, Kimball Musk, a Tesla board member, reportedly sold off 75,000 of his shares, over $27 million back in February, with the chairwoman of the board herself dumping more than $75 million worth of her shares. Only now, after he's taken a clear back seat in Trump's cabinet, has Tesla begun to recoup some of their losses on Wall Street. But to be fair, he sort of sold his credibility down the river when he started, I don't know, gunning for people's retirement funds and health benefits, and his painfully transparent "how do you do, fellow kids, I am become meme" persona hasn't helped much either. If his approval ratings are anything to go off, his griminess may just be enough to tank his car sales in a number of international markets, not just ours, because evidently Elon isn't satisfied being hated by just Americans. He needs to make himself the rest of the world's problem too.
Now, Elon Musk is settling his sights on Europe, having successfully worked to get his candidate elected in the US. Now, the Tesla and SpaceX billionaire, who's set to lead an advisory body for the new Trump administration in Washington.
If they could, I think other countries would probably tariff America for exporting people of the Elon Musk variety, because I can't imagine many people want this in their backyard.
While I was out here chopping it up with you, your bestie took a turn for the worst.
But that hasn't stopped Elon from catapulting himself into European politics anyway. Before we get to the ensemble of wacky characters across the pond, it's important to understand where Elon's fixation comes from. And for that, it might help to start by looking at some laws passed by the European Union. One being the Digital Services Act, the DSA, meant to address illegal content, misinformation, and shady business practices perpetuated by social media giants. It works alongside the Digital Markets Act, the DMA, which similarly works to ensure fairness among markets in the digital space. While Twitter is an American-owned company, its operations in Europe subject it to such EU regulations. And well, over the past couple of years, the EU has actually begun to throw its weight around a little bit, utilizing DMA as a means to open an investigation into Meta, particularly their so-called pay or consent model that forces users to either accept personalized advertising based off their own private data or elect to pay a subscription to avoid ads altogether. Effectively, they're pushing Facebook and Instagram users into a corner. Either give us your data or pay a fee. Pretty up, which is why the EU just slapped Apple and Meta with an $800 million fine at the end of April. Still, such laws have been scrutinized by a Trump administration that claims the EU is biased against American-based companies, with Trump himself directing American agencies to investigate the DSA and DMA. But what's also interesting is that Trump's EU criticism comes after both Google and Meta owners donated $1 million to Trump's inaugural fund. Kinda looks to me like Zuck and Sergio are kissing the ring in hopes of Trump getting the EU to stand down. And when it comes to Twitter and Elon Musk, things are hardly any different. You may have noticed Elon's fiery rebukes of the European Union on Twitter over the last couple months, referring to the 27-nation bloc as a, quote, layer cake of regulations and bureaucracy, labeling DSA as misinformation and flaming them with this bottom text meme from Tropic Thunder. Jesus Christ, imagine showing that to a judge. And honestly, he might have to do so sooner than later, if the EU ever does decide to pursue penalties against the billionaire, as recent reporting seems to suggest they might. Honestly, there are plenty of reasons for Elon to hate the EU. Not only are they considering funding their own version of Starlink after the US threatened to cut the service in Ukraine, they're also thinking about hitting Elon where it hurts. You might remember that when Elon first took over Twitter, one of the first things he did was enact a wide-ranging overhaul of the platform's content moderation policies, axing its Trust and Safety Council by firing those who made a living working round the clock to ensure illicit material didn't end up on the front page of one of the most visited visited websites in the world, decimating the team that addressed child sexual abuse material and reinstating the account of one user previously banned for posting CSM, despite the company's stated goal of having zero tolerance for such material. In addition to this, blatant anti-Semitism and xenophobia have also spread like wildfire since Musk's takeover, with some of the most heinous posts imaginable now being pushed to millions of new eyes. Hell, even Elon has boosted some of it personally. In a formal investigation kicked off in December 2023, the EU accused the platform of failing to counter, quote, the dissemination of illegal content, informing manipulation, and highlighted shortcomings in giving researchers access to Twitter's publicly accessible data, not to mention a deceptive design of user interface, referring to the skewed checkmark system that prioritizes those who cough up enough money to Elon on a monthly basis. While Twitter initially promised to stay committed to complying with the DSA and the regulatory process in 2023, its new stance as of April 2025 is that any EU enforcements against it would be, quote, an unprecedented act of political censorship and an attack on free speech. In July of 2024, Elon signaled interest in fighting back in a very public courtroom setting, signaling that he isn't afraid of mobilizing his deranged base of zealots to support his righteous cause. Only time will tell if Elon will be able to successfully curtail a political fine of $1 billion that EU regulators are reportedly pursuing, but in the meantime, he's sure as fuck done all that he can to create a coalition of anti-EU Avengers to protect him across all of Europe. For our first example, let's take a look at Britain, which Elon referred to as a tyrannical police state. It's also the home of Nigel Farage, leader of the UK's Reform Party. Now, Reform is often described as a far-right populist movement that seeks to purge the so-called woke gender ideology from public life and eliminate immigration from Middle Eastern countries. In 2024, British lawmakers plunged into panic mode when a meeting between Farage and Elon at Mar-a-Lago hit the headlines, seemingly indicating an alliance between the two figures. Farage confirmed these rumors when he told the BBC quite bluntly that Elon, quote, wants to help us in the next elections. He's not opposed to the idea of giving us money, provided he can do it legally through UK companies. The reason he added that little disclaimer there at the end is because, as a foreigner, it is technically illegal for Elon Musk to donate any funds to an election across the pond. However, as the case with all money in politics, there may be a workaround, which is that Elon could potentially funnel money through UK subsidies of his various companies, which have all raked in a collective £90 million between them in the last 2 years alone. This has all prompted other UK parties to lobby the current Liberal Prime Minister Keir Starmer to tighten election interference laws before it's too late. But honestly, Elon and Farage's bromance may not even last that long. When Farage refused to get behind far-right extremist and convicted stalker Tommy Robinson, Elon lamented Farage for, in his words, not having what it takes to become PM. It should be noted that Robinson, despite a court finding him liable for sowing the seeds for Islamic hate crimes in the UK, is a prominent Elon Musk ally himself. The billionaire frequently advocates for his release from prison on Twitter and even seems to be paying some of the man's legal fees. Yeah, who cares if he has a history of violence and anti-Muslim bigotry? Free my mans, all he did was tell the truth. If by telling the truth you mean he misrepresented video footage and endangered the family of an innocent young boy, then sure, I guess I agree with Elon here. Knowing this is the guy in charge of controlling the spread of information on Twitter is such a great feeling, isn't it? And these aren't the only European extremists he's signaled support for either. In January of last year, Elon tweeted that the biggest problem humanity faces is population collapse. Not the first time his fixation on world birth rates has reared its head in public, his affinity for spreading his own seed as far as it will possibly go has been well documented at this point. Ashley St. Clair recently attested that he told her he would be willing to give his sperm to anyone who wanted to have a child. But this post in particular ended up being quote tweeted by the Netherlands' very own Geert Wilders, described by some as the Dutch Donald Trump for his radical anti-immigration policies. Wilders echoed Elon's sentiment with quote, the biggest problem we face today is a collapse of our own culture and Western values due to open borders, mass mass immigration, an uncontrollable amount of non-Western asylum seekers, and last but not least, too many weak politicians advocating cultural relativism. Well, that's a bit of a bold take, and lots of buzzwords in that statement there. Not really sure who could agree with Agreed! Oh, okay, well, never mind. It was here that Elon was accused once more of perpetuating talking points not too far from the Great Replacement theory, a far-right theory that whites are being expelled from their homeland. Despite being debunked time and time again, it has recently gained a lot of traction in Europe, being commonly spewed by neo-Nazis and white nationalists alike. And look, just because Elon hasn't put on the Klan's hood and gone full Kanye yet, doesn't mean he isn't backing some eye-popping rhetoric in more subtle ways. Some would point to his kinship with the far-right leader at the helm of Italy's government right now, a woman by the name of Giorgia Meloni. The first thing to know about Meloni's political party, Brothers of Italy, is that it is so right-wing that a young politician by the name of Rochelle made headlines for leaving the party for a more center-right group in 2024, criticizing Brothers of Italy's use of the fascist World War II era Roman salute. Now, what makes Rochelle so significant, you ask? Well, her last name happens to be Mussolini. Yeah, she's that Mussolini's grandchild. When you've gotten too fascist for a Mussolini, you know you fucked up. But it makes sense. Meloni has never really tried to hide her association with a defunct neo-fascist party by the name of the Italian Socialist Movement, or MSI. MSI was established in 1946, founded by actual surviving members of Benito Mussolini's regime, and Meloni has always faced backlash for joining the group in the early 90s as a teenager. Now, it'd be one thing if Meloni had said, I was young back then, I messed up, I didn't know better than to join a neo-fascist movement with direct ties to Mussolini's regime. Okay, that would be bad, but not as bad as taking an ahistoric route to whitewash the group's history, which is exactly what she's done, claiming in a press conference that the MSI was actually just a party of the Democratic right, which ferried millions of Italians defeated by the war towards democracy. But that's not exactly how MSI's leaders would classify their own movement, with one party leader going so far as to author an entire book titled Democracy, Here's the Enemy. As stated by actual experts on the subject like historian David Conti, quote, the function of the MSI was to gather Mussolini's veterans and keep their political identity alive and functioning in contrast with democracy. It was quite literally established in an effort to keep the legacy of Italian fascism relevant in a post-war Italy that otherwise saw the widespread rise of anti-fascist sentiment. The anti-Semitic propagandist who founded MSI in the 40s was once a ranking member of Italy's fascist movement during the war, and despite Meloni's occasional repudiation for the crimes perpetuated by the Axis powers, she herself has not only defended this guy as a patriot of the past, esteemed by friends and adversaries, but other members of her party have tried to cape for different villains of the past too. According to author David Broder, who tracks the roots of Meloni's political party in the book Mussolini's Grandchildren, mayors belonging to Brothers of Italy have also been known to honor figures like Giuseppe Bottai, who, while serving as Minister of National Education in the 30s, purged Jewish children from Italian classrooms, and Italo Balbo, who, in addition to leading the brutal Black Shirt Army and refining Mussolini's Air Force, is known for exterminating over 100,000 Africans in colonized Libya. In fact, here he is in 1938 next to other guys you may have seen somewhere before. As to not draw such obvious parallels to the past, it makes sense for Meloni to sort of dress up her language as best she can, but it doesn't make her any less of the raging homophobe and xenophobe she is in practice. And she's also been known to spread Great Replacement talking points herself. In reference to Italy's influx of migration in 2017, Meloni told reporters, quote, 100,000 Italians were driven abroad last year, whereas 500,000 asylum seekers were brought into Italy in the last 3 years. I think there is a plan for ethnic substitution. It's not hard to see why Elon Musk has become so close with a person like Giorgia Meloni. Yes, they're both Lord of the Rings nerds, but more importantly, they're both incredibly nationalistic, share the same views on mass migration and declining birth rates, and are unapologetically anti-woke. Elon could be seen hanging around Meloni all the way back in 2022, attending a Brothers of Italy rally ahead of the election and throwing his enthusiastic support behind the now Prime Minister. While Meloni has referred to Elon as as a precious genius, Elon thinks of her as, quote, even more beautiful on the inside than she is on the outside. A sentence that just about makes me want to jump out of my own skin and die. He even had to come out and say he had no romantic relationship with the Prime Minister, probably after an angry call from one of his 1,000 baby mamas. Being one of the few world leaders to meet with Trump and Elon at Mar-a-Lago before his inauguration, however, Meloni has spurred rumors of a potential billion-dollar SpaceX contract with the Italian government. She's denied this potential deal has anything to do with said meeting in Florida, but has still seen pushback from those in her own government who disagree with the notion of buying satellites from outside the EU. But those talks seem to be falling apart anyway, according to Meloni's own defense minister. He did tell an Italian newspaper in April that things have come to a standstill due to statements by and about Elon Musk. What that means exactly, I guess we'll have to wait and see. But somehow, Meloni isn't even the most notorious of all of Elon's European associations. If you can believe it, things are about to get even fascistier. Fascist, whatever.
And do you know what Adolf Hitler did? The first thing, he switched off free speech.
Yes.
So he controlled the media, and without that, he would have never been successful.
Yes, exactly.
Never been successful.
Yes,
But
absolutely.
this is what you do.
Yeah, no, exactly.
This is Alice Weidel, the current leader of the far-right Alternative for Deutschland party in Germany. In 2021, the AfD was classified as a suspected extremist organization by Germany's domestic intelligence agency. This year, they've reclassified them as a confirmed extremist entity that bolsters racism and threatens democracy, as outlined in an 1,100-page report. A classification they temporarily paused after the party sued. But what's not in question is their growing base of support. During the last round of elections in February, the AfD earned 20.8% of the national vote, and it cemented itself as the second most popular party in the entire Bundestag, the German parliament, following up the Christian Democracy Union, which won control of the government with 28.6%. So while the AfD doesn't quite control things just yet, its historic gains have rattled the more moderate parties to their core, and signify the changing winds of German politics in a way that shouldn't be overlooked or dismissed so easily. The AfD is known all across Europe for its populist, hyper-nationalist sentiment. Its top issues include, but are not limited to, replacing the euro with the German mark, shifting from green to nuclear energy, leaving NATO, and of course, eliminating Muslim immigration across the board.
The German anti-immigration party Alternative for Germany has adopted an anti-Islam manifesto on the second day of its two-day conference in Stuttgart. Members voted to include a ban on minarets, the call to prayer, and the full face veil. Co-leader Jörg Meuthen said after the vote, Islam was not part of Germany.
The party first gained significant ground in 2017 for their strong opposition to Angela Merkel's 2015 immigration policy, which allowed more than 1 million asylum seekers into Germany. This is when Alice Weidel was elected to lead alongside Alexander Gauland, and together they've managed to steer the AfD so far to the right that one co-founder stepped down in 2020, accusing Gauland of moving the party too far in an extremist direction. It's true that what Weidel calls remigration, a term popularized by neo-Nazi Martin Sellner, or in other words, the deportation of anyone with a migrant background, has become a centerpiece of AfD ideology, and thus AfD members have gotten increasingly comfortable telling us what they think about migrants, refugees, and of course, the crimes against humanity perpetuated by past generations of German leadership. I think it's worth we showcase a few of those examples here. First up, we've got Maximilian Krah. Formerly a frontrunner for European Parliament, Krah has gone on record warning that mass immigration could lead to an Umvolkung of the German people, a Nazi term that once again harkens back to the Great Replacement theory. He more recently made headlines in 2024 though, when he told an Italian media outlet that not every member of Hitler's SS unit was, quote, automatically a criminal. While the comment cost him his seat in the AfD's EU delegation, it did not stop him from running a successful campaign for German parliament, being sworn in this past March. This is Andre Poggenberg, who came under fire in 2017 for saying that we should, quote, get rid of once and for all this gross rank of German racial corpus, another Nazi-era term. Poggenberg refused to apologize, left the AfD in 2019, and founded a new political party of his own that uses this image of a cornflower, which was also worn as a secret symbol identifying members of the then illegal Nazi party in Austria during the 1930s. Another controversial former member would be Christian Lüth, who was also forced to leave the AfD when he became too much of a liability for them to ignore. Caught on a hot mic, Lüth was exposed for admitting that the worse things get in Germany, the better they are for the AfD, outwardly stating that an influx of migrants actually helps the AfD because they can use it to stoke hatred, and in return, generate support for their movement. But what really sealed his fate was telling the documentary crew, quote, we could later shoot them all, referring of course to migrants. Quote, that's not at all the issue, or gassing, whatever you want, it's the same to me. And who could forget Beatrix von Storch, who outright demanded migrant women and children be shot by police on Twitter, as that would be preferable to them entering Germany. Yeah, the silver lining with this one though is that she actually got a pie in the face when two dudes in clown costumes infiltrated an AfD meeting. Sometimes really shitty people actually get what's coming to them. Some of the more shocking quotes from other AfD members include, but are not limited to, Marcel Grauf, a former assistant to two AfD state parliament members, was exposed by a German paper for writing a slew of reprehensible messages online, including, quote, I would not condemn anyone who sets fire to an occupied refugee shelter. Separately stating, quote, after all, we now have so many foreigners in the country that a Holocaust would be worthwhile again, along with stating, quote, I wish so much for a civil war and millions of dead. Women, children, I don't care. It would be so beautiful. I want to piss on corpses and dance on graves. Another member, Sandro Hersel, was quoted in 2015 for stating, quote, burning refugee shelters is not an act of aggression. Andreas Gelman in 2016. On the topic of imprisoning gay people in other countries, quote, we should do that in Germany too. Holger Arpa in 2017 was reported to have spoken of, quote, putting opponents up against the wall, digging a pit, and spreading slaked lime on top. Arpa was forced to leave the party when he was accused of sympathizing with a suspected terrorist, among other heinous behavior. Leaked online chats that were attributed to Arpa seemed to depict him praising Jan Hendrik H., a man accused of hoarding weapons and planning attacks on leftists, as someone who would, quote, fit perfectly within our ranks. He hates the left, has a well-stocked gun cabinet in his garage, and lives by the motto, if the left go completely crazy one day, I'll be prepared. If the AfD fails, Arpa reportedly stated, quote, it's good to have a cabinet full of guns and a box of ammunition in your garage. Arpa is also reported to have become close with the right-wing extremist identitarian movement, IB, asking one of its leaders if the IB might be willing to help them at an AfD demonstration. He explained, quote, we need a few decent Nazi volunteers. As if this guy couldn't get any worse, he was also alleged to have expressed cannibalistic desires in these chats, along with reportedly fantasizing fantasizing about 10-year-olds jumping on bounce castles. That same year, AFD member Dubravko Mondik admitted his party, quote, mainly differ from the NPD by our bourgeois support base, not so much by content. The NPD, if you didn't know, was formed as a replacement to the German Reich Party in 1964 by Adolf von Tadden, a former member of Hitler's army and supporter of Goebbels' associate Werner Neumann during the 1953 East German election. Tadden led the NPD from 1967 to 1971, laying the groundwork for what became the most infamous neo-fascist party to follow the Nazis. Gauland himself, one of AFD's founders, once wound up in trouble for writing an op-ed that sounded suspiciously similar to a Hitler speech. And Vidal, whose anti-immigration stance made headlines in 2018 when she declared, quote, burqas, girls in headscarves, publicly supported knife men, and other good-for-nothings will not secure our prosperity, economic growth, or the social state, is also notably the granddaughter of one Hans Vidal, a prominent Nazi judge during World War II appointed directly by Adolf Hitler. Perhaps the most infamous member of the AFD, however, is this Ellen DeGeneres-looking by the name of Bjorn Høcke. Høcke was once very much the face of the AFD and still plays an active role as the leader of the party in Thuringia. After making headlines for referring to a Holocaust memorial in Berlin as, quote, a monument of shame, he has also called for Germany to quit atoning for its Nazi past, stating that, quote, the big problem is that Hitler is portrayed as the absolute evil. Høcke is so extreme, in fact, that he's even been linked to militant neo-Nazis such as Thorsten Heiss, coming under fire in 2015 for allegedly writing pro-Nazi articles under a pen name for Heiss's NPD journal in 2011 and 2012, according to German sociologist Andreas Kemper. Kemper reported in 2019 that Høcke wrote articles for the magazine People in Motion, published by Thorsten Heiss of the NPD under the pseudonym Landolf Ladig, in which he predicted a revolution. Therefore, the right-wing movement must prepare to position itself at the forefront of this revolution in order to reinstate Nazi economic policies on a racial biological basis. Høcke denied the claim, but refused to sign a statement that he had never written for NPD magazines under oath. This scandal was followed up by a time in 2021 when he declared in a speech, quote, everything for our homeland, everything for Germany. Well, I'm sorry to say that the phrase everything for Germany happens to be a Nazi dog whistle, as it was once the phrase carved into SS blades in World War II and has served as a Nazi rallying cry historically. Now, of course, he claimed to know nothing about this, but the court found him guilty anyway, as he was convicted just last year. Whether he really didn't know what he was saying in 2021 or not is irrelevant anyway in my eyes, since he still went on to use the phrase again in 2023, well after he had already gotten punished for it the first time. Except this time, he smugly paused after saying everything for, allowing the audience to fill in the rest.
Alles für unsere Heimat, alles für Sachsen-Anhalt, alles für...
Despite the obvious dog whistling, Høcke has continued to play dumb in order to generate sympathy on Twitter. And you may say that, well, not many people could be dumb enough to fall for such a transparent ploy. Why is this illegal? Brother, come on! In December 2024, Elon Musk published an op-ed in the German paper Die Welt praising the AFD as the last vestige of hope for the nation, supporting its ideas for economic revival, immigration, national identity, and political realism. Elon shrugs off the far-right labeling by reminding people that Alice Vidal, the AFD's leader, is a lesbian woman in a same-sex relationship. Quote, does that sound like Hitler to you? Please. By that logic, I guess Jess Pearly Things isn't a misogynist because she's a woman, and Nick Fuentes can't be a white nationalist because he's Hispanic. Also, I don't know, man, if you're even having to reference Hitler in your post endorsing a political party party, I think that's a little bit of a red flag to me. A very distinct red flag. It's all a very big shift from just October 2023, when, after one Tesla supporter raised concerns about Elon's growing interest in European politics, Elon insisted he didn't know AFD from a hole in the ground, confirming directly to this person that he did not support the party. Phew, that was close, right? Well, fast forward less than a year to June 2024, and he's tweeting about them again, this time asking why there's such negative sentiment around AFD. Quote, they keep saying far right, but the policies of the AFD that I've read about don't sound extremist. Maybe I'm missing something. Mind you, the overwhelming majority of those quotes I just read, saying it's okay to shoot migrant women and children, and that we need another Holocaust, were all said years and months before Elon typed these words. It took me 5 seconds to find them too. How you could do so much research on the AFD's policies and miss the multiple instances of AFD members clearly stoking violence and terrorism is beyond me. And yes, I get Vital might not be as outwardly bloodthirsty as some of her constituents, but there's a reason she's the face of the party. Being a Nazi is very much still illegal in Germany, which is why Hucko was fined for even repeating one of their mottos. But that also means neo-fascists must conceal their true intent behind dog whistles and hyper-nationalist sentiment. Some of them say the quiet part out loud, sure, but Vital is a more competent politician than that. She is banking on helpful idiots to give her party legitimacy. She wants the benefit of the doubt. And while I wouldn't exactly call Elon a helpful idiot, he has done more than enough to normalize the AFD to an audience of people who may not be as in tune with German politics otherwise, as he went on to really amp up his support throughout the latter half of 2024 and into 2025, tweeting things like, only AFD can save Germany, the morning before a deadly Islamophobic terror attack at a Christmas market in Magdeburg that killed 5 and injured 200 people. Lo and behold, the terrorist that carried out the attack had praised Elon's buddy Geert online, held strong anti-immigration sentiment, and was associated with the AFD, according to police. His bio on Twitter read, quote, Germany wants to Islamize Europe. Elon, of course, said nothing of this attack, but kept singing the AFD's praises regardless. It even got to a point where I saw this post as a promoted tweet on my own timeline. Elon Musk is paying to promote his own endorsements of a German extremist party on the platform he owned. Elon Musk is not seeing the gates of heaven. All of this culminated in late January 2025, shortly after appearing front and center at Trump's second inauguration and setting off a wave of discourse on whether or not he threw up a Nazi salute. Elon Musk joined an AFD rally via Zoom, where he spoke alongside Alice Vital and attempted to drum up support for the party in the weeks ahead of their election. And yes, as you could probably guess, all the anti-Muslim immigration dog whistling was there too.
It's okay, it's good to be proud of German culture, German values, and not to lose that in some sort of multiculturalism that dilutes everything.
Even if we were to be absolutely and totally charitable to Elon and say that he somehow didn't know what he was doing with that gesture, the ensuing backlash that he was still facing at this point in time should have meant that he was on his extra best behavior. Like, if the entire world thought that I was a Nazi, I would be pretty desperate to make it known that I was not one. And I can't imagine I would be saying this in reference to Germany's Nazi past.
I think there's frankly too much of a focus on past guilt, and we need to move beyond that.
I mean, why say that if you aren't explicitly trying to pander to those who are sympathetic to extremist ideals? It doesn't make sense to harp on the crimes of this generation's parents and great-grandparents unless you are trying to signal something more. I don't know.
Children should not be guilty of the sins of their parents, or even let alone their parents, their great-grandparents, maybe even. And you should be optimistic and excited about a future for Germany.
And to do it all so close to Holocaust Remembrance Day too feels a little concerning to me as well. From my perspective, it looks like the coincidences are piling up, as stated by Polish President Donald Tusk, a name that kind of sounds like the cartoon walrus version of Donald Trump. Quote, "The words we heard from the main actors of the AfD rally about great Germany and the need to forget German guilt for Nazi crimes sounded all too familiar and ominous, especially only hours before the anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz." While the visual of a screaming audience of people may not be the most encouraging sight to some, it's important to remember that Germany is kind of a big place, and while fascism may very well be on the rise there as well as in other countries across the Western world, not everyone is on board. No population is a monolith, and there is still a significant slice of the country incensed by a foreign billionaire's foray into their government affairs. Take, for example, the thousands of protesters who stood in opposition to the AfD right outside the doors of the very event Elon attended in January. Not to mention the tens of thousands of anti-fascist demonstrators that gathered all across Germany. 40,000 in Cologne and 35,000 in Berlin, putting on an encouraging display of anti-Nazi songs and chants, banners and big letters spelling out hope and resistance. Countless additional protests have broken out across Germany in recent months too, with hordes of protesters throwing up signs like these in opposition to Trump's policies and to Elon's interference. Satirical billboards like this one can be seen all over the country as Tesla sales reach eye-watering lows. In Q1, the company sold just under 5,000 cars in Germany, a 62% drop from 2024, marking the lowest quarterly sales the company has seen there in 3 years. Despite EVs being more popular than ever, a recent study in the UK found that 70% of Tesla drivers are now ashamed of their cars because of Elon. And in March, Forbes reported that Tesla might just be dead on arrival in Germany, with one survey showing that out of 100,000 Germans, 94% said they would never consider buying one of Elon's vehicles. Partly, I imagine, because they like their arms and don't want to see them get blown off when their car randomly explodes in their driveway, but also because owning a Tesla is now seen as a political statement, one that many regular people would rather have nothing to do with. This might come as a shock to some, but when you start cozying up to fascists, buying political influence, lashing out at the social safety net, attacking the courts, silencing critics, chastising your own kids, and throwing up multiple Nazi salutes at the inauguration of a deeply polarizing president, people might start to think you're a little cringe. It might feel like every morning you wake up, grab your phone, and suddenly you're greeted with 8 new shocking horrors at the top of the headlines. At least that's been my experience for the past few years. Wait, he's only been president 4 months? We've clearly got a long way to go before things ever have a chance of leveling out. This video has already taken 2 months to make, and so much has already happened that I don't even know what to say anymore. Donald Trump has deported immigrants with protected status to a concentration camp in El Salvador. Elon Musk has had 2 rocket ships explode over the ocean, sprinkling debris and causing mass delays at a multitude of Florida airports. Masterful gambit once again, sir. Trump has announced tariffs, rescinded them, brought them back, rescinded them again, triggering catastrophic market instability and the possibility of empty shelves, all while the Redditor-in-Chief calls the trade counselor slurs on the app he owns. Trump has brazenly violated the First Amendment by apprehending several pro-Palestinian student demonstrators without an arrest warrant, while admitting they did nothing wrong. Elon Musk played Fortnite with Connor Eats Pants. The news doesn't end, and it's not about to calm down anytime soon. If what's happening feels like a deliberate attempt to bombard the public with so much news that it's virtually impossible to stay focused on one particular story for longer than a few days at a time, that's because that is what's happening. Longtime Trump ally Steve Bannon, who played an instrumental role in landing him in the White House the first time around, has spoken on this strategy candidly. It's called flooding the zone, and it's best summarized as a calculated effort to dazzle media outlets with never-ending sensationalist stories so that you may have an easier time pushing your agenda into action amidst the chaos.
I said, all we have to do is flood the zone. Every day we hit them with 3 things. they'll bite on one, and we'll get all of our stuff done. Bang, bang, bang. These guys will never be able to recover.
As much as I hate this man, I think he's right about this. Legacy news media is stupid sometimes.
Do we even know who is this 4chan?
When engaging with them, we should bear in mind how they're often beholden to corporate interests, and that they don't always report honestly or ask the right questions because of it. There's a reason they aren't trusted by the general public, not to mention that the 24-hour news cycle lends itself to people feeling overwhelmed and fatigued whenever a massive event takes place. Something monumental will happen, the media temporarily gets up in arms about it, only to completely move on from it in a matter of days, replacing it with the next over-the-top, unbelievable story everyone's talking about until the cycle repeats. Trump and his allies have used this non-stop information assault to their advantage since he first slid down that golden escalator in 2015. And besides Trump himself, the next best utilizer of this strategy in recent years has been Elon Musk.
I am become...
Elon Musk used to be pretty successful at making it seem like he was the only billionaire actually in tune with the public consciousness. Once beloved by all angles of the political spectrum, Elon was once very good at penetrating the liberal establishment and propping himself up as a man with his finger on the pulse of culture, always down for a Simpsons cameo.
Hello, I'm Elon Musk. What the?
A game of Diablo, or a collab with the then biggest YouTuber on the platform. A man who genuinely wants the best for humanity and is at the precipice of pushing our species to new frontiers outside of Earth's atmosphere. A man you could trust. He's never been that, but something significant has changed over the past couple of years. He got too annoying, and people are finally paying attention.
It is what is being called the Not My President's Day protests. They are protesting in Portland, Oregon, in Vancouver, Washington, in Orlando, in Arizona, in Utah, in West Virginia, holding signs that say, "No kings, where law ends, tyranny begins." In Houston, chanting, "No one voted for Elon Musk."
Elon may tell himself that these people are all funded by the likes of George Soros to help him feel better, but the reality is we have zero proof of that. We do have proof of a billionaire giving away millions of dollars as an incentive to vote for a specific candidate, and his name is Elon Musk! If you couple his unpopularity on Main Street with the Washington political elites heading up the myriad of agencies targeted by Doge, as well as the lower-level federal employees being made to send in a bullshit email every week proving what they've done to justify their job, then you get a recipe for seething hatred of the billionaire on all levels of American society. What's ironic to me is that if Elon had just had the restraint to shut the fuck up for a second and keep himself in the background, far away from any sort of spotlight, his reputation would be probably fine, and that people wouldn't feel so compelled to smear dog poop and carve swastikas into their ugly-ass cars. He could have kept all the power he always had, probably could have gained more in fact, had he just done what all other billionaires do and pull the strings of the politicians without inserting himself into everybody's lives. Don't get me wrong, I don't want any billionaire having any influence over our political system, but I do want this guy out of the news forever. I saw a sign recently at one of the protests that read, "I wish I was Elon's kid so I would never see him again," and honestly, that's how I'm starting to feel too. But it speaks to the tragedy that Elon Musk is facing right now. While his immense wealth bought him seemingly endless sway within the federal government, his unrelenting ego and musty vibes might just be his downfall in the end. If he and his companies benefit by his ties to Trump, then they could just as easily fall apart if his relationship with the president ever does. And really, I don't know how much longer he'll have such influence over a guy who's been known to burn bridges with his entire first administration. A guy who will throw just about anyone under the bus at any time if he gets his ass out of trouble. Dudes have literally gone to jail for him, man. I can't emphasize it enough. Donald Trump will 100% drop Elon Musk the second he stops being useful. And if I may just be a little optimistic, we might finally be getting to that point. Elon had plenty of ambitious goals upon first arriving in Washington, but the numbers prove that his empty promises, frivolous firings, and comparatively minuscule cuts to federal spending have failed to live up to the incredibly lofty expectations he set for himself and his agency. Instead, as recently put by Michael Sherher and Ashley Parker in The Atlantic, quote, "As Musk winds down his official time in Washington, he has found himself isolated within the upper reaches of the Trump administration, having failed to build necessary alliances and irritating many of the department and agency heads he was ostensibly there to help. His team failed to find anything close to the 13-figure savings he promised. Court challenges clipped other projects. Cabinet secretaries blocked Doge cuts they said reduced critical services. All the while, Musk's net worth fell, his companies tanked in value, and he became an object of frequent gossip and ridicule. Now, this could all still change. I obviously can't see into the future, and with the way things have been going, it really does start to feel like anything can happen at any time. But if the past few months are any indication at all, it's that tolerance of Elon Musk has a very real ceiling, and that no matter how much he may promise to his supporters, he will always have to grapple with the seasoned bureaucrats who correctly write him off as the laughable fraud he's always been. And as far as the general public is concerned, Elon hasn't actually added much of anything to their lives. Still, don't be surprised when you see establishment hacks running defense for the billionaire anyway, demanding you be more grateful for all that Elon has done for you.
I think the American people ought to be saying to Elon, thank you, thank you, thank you.
I think that regardless of Elon's proximity to the presidency, it's important to bear in mind that we, the people, are not as utterly powerless as a guy like Elon may want us to think we are. I mean, if it weren't for the resounding upset in Wisconsin, Elon might have only continued to rise in prominence in Washington. But because of the pushback he's received around the world, Republicans who want a chance at winning their primaries in 2026 are having to distance themselves from a man who, just a few months ago, they swore would be the new face of government efficiency. We have more control over our leaders than they'd like us to think we do. Despite our political disagreements, we have more in common with each other than we will ever have with the man who makes millions of dollars a day off the backs of the taxpayer. I think people often forget just how much money Elon Musk has. I mean, it's $360 billion at the time of me writing this. That's almost the entire GDP of South Africa itself. One man possesses all that power, and he's used it to buy his way into even more power. Power that he intends to leverage to further enrich himself, his corporations, and his billionaire buddies, who also possess GDP-like net worths. And in order to jam through the agenda he wants, he needs to flood the zone with non-stop controversial news stories. He needs us to stop paying attention. He needs us to fight one another. He needs guys like Joe Rogan to polish up his image, make people forget his immense global power for a little bit, and think, you know what, maybe this guy isn't so bad. But just like Zuckerberg, Bezos, and Gates, Elon Musk doesn't give a about you or me or anything that isn't actively making him richer, more powerful, and more liked as an individual. He wants authority and he wants approval. He is an overpaid crybaby with a huge chip on his shoulder, working around the clock to prove that meritocracy is a myth. With the money he's obtained from his highly lucrative investments, Elon Musk believes he can reshape the Western world as he sees fit, installing far-right maniacs in every corner of the globe. I believe if he had his way, he'd probably do what he did at Tesla and make himself CEO of Earth. But if the recent demonstrations outside of storefronts and inside local town halls tell us anything, it's that the public is not so easily demurred by such shameless appeals to corporate interests. A recent Tesla takedown campaign is gaining prominence all over the country as we speak, as reported in Rolling Stone. The same article outlines how Elon is quite literally radicalizing the same people he's firing. One formerly fired and rehired wildlife biologist at the EPA told the magazine that, quote, "I would thank Elon for radicalizing me because I had actually never attended a protest until a week after I got fired. I spent a long time sitting on the sidelines thinking there's so much bad stuff happening. He gave me the push that I needed to use my voice to speak up and speak out." People have brains. They see what's going on and they don't like it. If we've learned learned anything from the race in Wisconsin, it's that we have the power to make our voices heard and have it matter. It's going to take work and requires action on every level, whether it's supporting candidates who promise to stand by the people in times of crisis and holding those candidates accountable when they're elected to serve, or being active in your local communities, protecting those who will be most affected by what's going on. The future we want is in our grasp, but we must first be willing to come together and oppose oligarchy on all fronts. It's true that Elon Musk gets a lot of hate, but honestly, I think we can do better.
Anyone spamming the chat will get lost connection. Connection lost.